Welcome to Legends of Humanity, the international storytelling channel that brings to life the extraordinary journeys of those who change the world forever. In today's episode, we walk alongside Mahatma Gandhi, the father of India, the pioneer of nonviolent resistance, and one of the most influential moral leaders in human history. From a timid boy in Porbandar to a fearless soul who shook the foundations of empires without raising a weapon, Gandhi's life is not just a story of independence, it is a legacy of truth, sacrifice, and peace for all mankind. Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi was born on October 2, 1869, in the small coastal town of Porbandar, in present-day Gujarat, India. He was the youngest child in a devout Hindu family, quiet and observant by nature, often standing in the background while life moved around him. His father, Karamchand Gandhi, served as a Diwana chief minister in the princely state, known for his integrity and political acumen. But it was his mother, Putlibai, who left the deepest imprint on his soul. A deeply spiritual woman, she lived by ritual, prayer, and simplicity, embodying faith not as doctrine, but as discipline. In this household, religion was not a Sunday ritual. It was air. It was rhythm. From an early age, Gandhi was immersed in the practices of Vaishnavism, worshipping Lord Vishnu, while also absorbing the influence of Jainism, a neighboring tradition that emphasized nonviolence, vegetarianism, and self-restraint. The concept of ahimsa, causing harm to any living being, was not taught through sermons, but modeled in daily life. Fasting, silence, prayer, and service to others were not abstract virtues, but household habits. Though born into privilege, Gandhi's childhood was unremarkable in many ways. He was small, shy, and unathletic. He avoided games, feared darkness, and often clung to his mother's side. In school, he was a middling student, quiet, obedient, and easily overlooked. Yet beneath the meek exterior stirred a fierce inner world. He watched people. He remembered words. He questioned what he didn't understand, not aloud, but silently, persistently. Like many children of his time, Mohandas was married youngly, 13 through an arranged marriage to Kasturba, a girl his own age. The union thrust him suddenly into adult responsibilities and emotional turbulence he was not prepared for. He was a boy playing at being a husband, confused by intimacy, bound by expectation. And still, he tried awkwardly at first, but always earnestly to understand love, duty, and partnership. During adolescence, Gandhi wavered between the teachings he revered and the temptations of rebellion. He once tried smoking, experimented with eating meat in secret, and even lied to his parents. But each deviation haunted him. Riddled with guilt, he confessed to his father in a trembling letter. His father's silent tears, shed without anger, marked him more deeply than any punishment could. That moment became a cornerstone in Gandhi's moral life, a reminder that truth, once abandoned, cost more than pride. As he grew older, he remained reserved, but his curiosity blossomed. He read stories of heroic kings and saints. He listened to elders speak of righteousness, justice, and devotion. He began to wonder what made a life meaningful, what made a person truly noble. These questions took root slow and deep, like seeds in monsoon soil. It was not yet clear that this shy boy from Porbandar would one day become a voice for millions. But already, the outlines of his destiny had begun to take shape. In his silence, there was strength. In his simplicity, resolve. And in his earliest understanding of nonviolence, a revolution was quietly preparing to unfold. In 1888, at the age of 19, Mohandas Gandhi boarded a ship to London. He was nervous, unsure, wrapped in the hopes of his family and the weight of tradition. His mother had made him swear an oath before a Jain monk to abstain from meat, alcohol, and women during his time abroad. It was a promise he held like armor. As the Indian Ocean faded behind him and the gray mist of England appeared, Gandhi crossed more than an ocean. He crossed into another world. London was everything. Porbandar was not vast, cold, fast, modern. The streets were filled with strange sounds, unfamiliar faces, and customs that baffled him. He had come to study law at the Inner Temple, one of the city's prestigious legal institutions. But more than legal theory, Gandhi was about to learn something far more complex: how to become himself. At first, he struggled to fit in. Eager not to offend, he tried to adopt British manners. He bought a top hat and tailcoat, took violin lessons, and even enrolled in elocution classes to refine his English accent. But no matter how carefully he dressed or how politely he spoke, he remained, in the eyes of many, an outsider. The realization stung, but it also sparked something deeper: the quiet beginning of self-respect, not built on imitation, but on principle. He lived simply in a modest room, cooked his own vegetarian meals, and read voraciously. He explored religions, not only Hinduism, but also Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam. He found beauty in the Sermon on the Mount, was drawn to the teachings of Tolstoy and Thoreau, and began to understand that faith, like law, was not confined to one culture. He questioned dogma, yet found a deepening reverence for the idea of universal truth. Socially, he remained distant. His shyness persisted, his voice still hesitant, his presence often overlooked in crowded rooms. Yet, in the solitude of London, he began to shape the inner world that would guide him for life. He learned restraint, patience, and the value of introspection. In place of youthful confusion, a quiet discipline took root. Studying law, he absorbed the foundations of justice, rights, duties, fairness, and reason. But he also noticed what the law lacked: compassion, humility, soul. He began to understand that legality and morality did not always walk side by side. This realization would haunt him in years to come, but in London, it became a quiet conviction that laws must serve humanity, not merely govern it. He never fully became part of British society, and eventually, he stopped trying. He began to accept the simple clothes, plain food, and spiritual clarity that had always been part of him. The polished shoes remained, but the illusion of becoming British in heart began to fade. In its place emerged something stronger: a sense of identity rooted in principle, not appearance. When Gandhi returned to India in 1891, law degree in hand, he was no longer a boy uncertain of the world. He was still quiet, still modest, but there was a firmness in his walk, a steadiness in his gaze. He had traveled far from home to discover that home was never something you leave behind. It is something you carry, refine, and one day offer back to the world. In 1893, Mohandas Gandhi accepted a modest legal assignment in South Africa. He was just 23, newly arrived. With little experience beyond books and courtroom theory, he expected a year of quiet legal work. What he encountered instead would change the course of his life and, eventually, history. South Africa, under British colonial rule, was a land of division. The white minority controlled nearly all aspects of power. Indians, brought in as laborers and traders, were treated as inferiors, mocked, restricted, humiliated. Gandhi stepped into this world unaware of what awaited him. That ignorance would not last long. Just days after his arrival, Gandhi boarded a train to Pretoria. He held a first-class ticket, dressed neatly, confident in his right to travel, but at a small station in Pietermaritzburg, a white passenger objected to his presence in the compartment. Gandhi refused to move. Moments later, he was thrown off the train into the cold night, onto the platform, his dignity scattered like the dust beneath his feet. That moment became a flame, not of anger, but of clarity. Until then, Gandhi had lived within rules: respectable, polite, cautious. But here, rules protected only the powerful. Here, law and morality had parted ways. And so, he began to ask, what can one man do when dignity is denied by law itself? Instead of returning home, Gandhi stayed. He took up the cause of Indian residents, organizing meetings, writing petitions, and confronting injustice through words, not weapons. But the laws grew harsher. The government demanded that all Indians register, carry passes, and submit to searches without cause. Resistance meant imprisonment. Gandhi responded not with riots, but with a new idea zone thing deeper than protest: something that fused courage with conscience. He called it Satyagraha, Sanskrit term meaning truth, force, or soul force. It was not passive resistance. It was active, disciplined, and moral. It called on individuals to suffer willingly rather than retaliate, to hold firm in truth without hatred. He led marches. He encouraged people to burn their registration papers. He faced jail not with fear but with resolve. And when violence erupted, he condemned it even when it came from those who followed him. For Gandhi, how one fought was as important as what one fought for. Years passed. Gandhi was beaten, arrested, insulted, but never silenced. Through hunger strikes and public appeals, through relentless dialogue and peaceful disobedience, he carved a space where human dignity could breathe even under chains. South Africa did not change overnight, but Gandhi had changed. No longer just a lawyer, he had become a leader, a voice, a symbol. He had discovered that true power came not from domination, but from discipline. That justice could not be begged, it had to be lived. By the time he left South Africa in 1914, Gandhi was no longer simply Mohandas. He was Mahatma Great Soul, not because he sought the title, but because he had earned it, step by step, on dusty roads, in crowded jails, and in the quiet, unwavering conviction that truth, when held with love, could shake empires. When Gandhi returned to India in 1915, he was greeted not as a stranger, but as a quiet storm. He had spent over 2 decades away studying law in London, resisting injustice in South Africa, but now he stood once more on Indian soil, transformed. He was no longer just Mohandas Gandhi. He had become something more, a vessel of purpose, tempered by discipline, and carrying with him a vision India had not yet seen. The country he returned to was restless. British rule stretched deep into every corner of Indian life, its laws, its economy, its dignity. Taxes were high, farmers were broken, factories served the empire, not the people. Political leaders debated reforms in drawing rooms, but the masses, millions of laborers, farmers, and villagers remained voiceless. They had no seats at the table. They had only suffering. At first, Gandhi observed. He traveled. He listened. From the villages of Bihar to the streets of Bombay, he walked among the Pio Planat above them, but with them. He wore homespun cloth. He spoke in local tongues. He shared their food, their grief, their hopes, and slowly they began to see in him not a politician, but a mirror. He was one of them, and yet he carried something larger. The audacity to believe that freedom was not only possible, but inevitable. His first campaigns were small but powerful. In Champaran, he stood with oppressed indigo farmers. In Kedah, he supported peasants refusing to pay taxes during a famine. Each time, he insisted on truth and nonviolence. Each time, the British were forced to listen, not because of riots, but because of reason, not because of bullets, but because of moral clarity. Then came the tragedy that would awaken a nation. In 1919, British troops opened fire on unarmed civilians gathered in Amritsar, killing hundreds. The massacre shattered illusions. It exposed the brutal cost of submission, and Gandhi, heartbroken but unshaken, responded not with revenge but with resistance. He launched the non-cooperation movement to call for Indians to withdraw from all that upheld the empire. British schools, courts, titles, goods. It was not destruction, it was disengagement. A massive, organized turning away. And it worked. For the first time, the British felt the weight of a people rising not in rage, but in silence, in refusal. Gandhi became the soul of the movement. His image ample, barefoot, wrapped in khadi cloth, spread across the land. But more than image, it was his presence that stirred hearts. He spoke not of hate, but of self-respect. Not of rebellion, but of responsibility. Freedom, he taught, was not granted, it was grown. And it began in the mind, in the will to stand upright without raising a fist. The British called him dangerous. Some Indians called him too gentle. But Gandhi knew that India needed more than victory. needed transformation. A freedom built on violence, he believed, would only reproduce new chains. What he sought was deeper, the liberation of the soul. As the 1920s unfolded, Gandhi was no longer just a leader, he was a movement. He had given India not only a path to walk, but a reason to believe. And in that belief, a sleeping giant had begun to stir. The call did not come with fanfare. There were no armies, no rifles, no marching drums. Instead, it came with a whisper carried across villages, towns, and city, a whisper that soon became a roar. In 1920, Gandhi launched the non-cooperation movement, not as an act of rebellion, but as a declaration of dignity. It was time, he said, for Indians to stop participating in their own oppression. The message was simple yet radical. Do not fight the British with violence, deny them the cooperation that sustains their rule. Withdraw from colonial schools. Resign from government posts. Refuse British goods. Reject foreign titles. Spin your own cloth. Speak your own language. Stand not in hatred but in resolve. It was a revolution without bullets. And it spread like wildfire. For the first time, millions of Indian peasants, merchants, students, women rose not in chaos, but in coordination. Markets emptied of British textiles. Courts faced resignations from lawyers. Streets echoed with chants not of blood, but of hope. The spinning wheel became a symbol, not just of economic freedom, but of moral strength. Gandhi himself adopted the simplest life imaginable, wearing homespun khadi and walking barefoot, embodying the very change he preached. But the path was not without peril. The British, bewildered by the movement's scale, responded with arrests and crackdowns. Gandhi was watched closely, trailed by police, his every word measured, yet he never wavered. He wrote, he marched, he spoke in town after town, not to inflame but to awaken. His voice, quiet yet unwavering, reached where laws could not. He reminded his people that true power lay not in rulers, but in the ruled who choose to obey. Still, tension mounted. In 1922, in the town of Chauri Chaura, a protest turned violent. A mob, enraged by police brutality, set fire to a police station. Officers died. The news broke Gandhi's heart. He had called for nonviolence not just in word, but in discipline. This, he believed, was not satyagraha. This was uncontrolled rage. In an act that stunned the nation, Gandhi called off the entire movement. Critics called it cowardice. Followers were confused. The momentum was real, the spirit alive. Why stop now? But Gandhi stood firm. Freedom bought through violence, he believed, would poison the soul of the nation. India must not become what it resisted. And so, with the same calm strength he had used to ignite the movement, he extinguished it. Soon after, he was arrested. In prison, he fasted, reflected, and wrote. The walls could not contain him. Outside, his absence only deepened his presence. The British may have jailed the man, but they could not jail the idea. Gandhi had shown that a people long ruled could stand upright without swords. That silence, if rooted in truth, could shake thrones. The non-cooperation movement did not win India its freedom, not yet. But it changed everything. It united the nation like never before. It gave the powerless a voice, the voiceless a path, and the oppressor a new kind of fear, the fear of being ignored. And from that quiet defiance, a new India began to take form. It began with a walk, not a protest, not a riot, just a walk. On March 12, 1930, at dawn, Mohandas Gandhi stepped out of his ashram near Ahmedabad with 78 followers, dressed in simple khadi, staff in hand, eyes steady on the road ahead. Their destination was the Arabian Sea. Their mission, to make salt. It seemed ordinary, even absurd. But beneath that simplicity lay a challenge as powerful as any revolution. British law forbade Indians from producing or selling their own salt. It was a symbol of domination embedded in daily life, every pinch of salt, a quiet reminder of foreign rule. Gandhi chose salt precisely because it was so small, so universal, so essential. In doing so, he showed that resistance did not need weapons. It needed meaning. Day by day, mile by mile, the procession moved. Villagers emerged from homes to greet them, some joining the march, others offering food and water. The lines of dusty feet became a river of defiance. Gandhi spoke at each stop, not in anger, but with clarity. He called for courage, not violence, for discipline, not hatred, for freedom that was not born of rage, but of self-mastery. News spread. The world watched. Journalists from around the globe followed the march, chronicling every step. British officials mocked it at first, a foolish walk by an old man. But as the days passed, laughter gave way to worry. Gandhi had turned salt into a spark. On April 6, after 240 miles and 24 days, the march reached Dandi. Gandhi waded into the sea, scooped a handful of salty mud, and let it dry in his palm. Then he raised it. With that gesture, he had broken the law. Not with violence, but with grace. Not with fanfare, but with resolve. The act ignited a movement. Across the country, thousands began to make or sell illegal salt. Women boiled seawater in pots. Farmers stirred pans over open fires. The law cracked, not from explosives, but from irrelevance. The empire tried to crush the defiance. Over 60, 0 were arrested. Gandhi himself was jailed soon after. But the image of him at Dandi had already become legenda man, bending to the sea, lifting freedom grain by grain. The Salt March changed how the world saw India, how India saw itself. It taught that the smallest acts could carry the greatest weight, that a handful of salt could crumble an empire, and that true resistance was not just about defying the law, but about reclaiming the soul. For Gandhi, the march was never just about salt. It was about dignity, about the power of ordinary people to stand, to walk, to act with conscience. And from that long, deliberate walk to the sea, a tide had begun to rise slow, steady, unstoppable. By 1942, the world was at war. Europe burned, Asia trembled, and India, still under British rule, was caught in a storm not of its choosing. The British had dragged India into World War II without asking, without consent. Indian soldiers were dying on distant fronts while their homeland remained shackled. The patience of a people, tested for decades, had begun to run dry. Gandhi, now in his 70s, had watched long enough. He had pleaded, reasoned, marched, and fasted. He had appealed to the conscience of the empire, and for a time, he had hoped it might change. But now, the stakes were different. Freedom could no longer be delayed. The soul of a nation could not be postponed until after a war it never chose. And so, on August 8, 1942, standing before a crowd in Bombay, Gandhi spoke the words that shook the world. Quit India. He did not shout, he did not threaten, he simply demanded. The British must leave. Not tomorrow, not next year, now. It was not a request. It was a command rooted in moral authority. The movement that followed was unlike any before. Across the country, protests erupted. Strikes, demonstrations, and acts of civil disobedience spread like wildfire. This time, the British did not wait. Within hours, Gandhi and the entire leadership of the Indian National Congress were arrested. The empire had hoped to cut off the head of the movement, but what they had failed to understand was this. The movement no longer needed a head. It had become a heartbeat. Students marched, workers walked out, villagers cut rail lines and defied police orders. Women led underground networks, smuggling messages and leaflets. The resistance was chaotic, uncoordinated, but it was everywhere. The British responded with brutality, mass arrests, shootings, torture, but the fire would not go out. Gandhi, imprisoned yet again, grew weaker. He fasted, he fell ill. And yet, even from behind bars, his silence echoed louder than the empire's guns. The moral weight of his demand, leave. Let India live, gained strength. The world began to listen. American leaders questioned their allies' hypocrisy, fighting for democracy abroad while denying it in India. British citizens themselves began to wonder, how long could this last? The moral bankruptcy of colonialism was being laid bare, not by violence, but by an old man's calm insistence that enough was enough. Gandhi was released 2 years later, frail but unbroken. The movement had not achieved immediate freedom, but it had shattered the illusion of British permanence. The empire could no longer pretend. India would not wait. The Quit India movement was the final push, the last great cry before the dawn. It was not perfect, not entirely peaceful, but it was undeniable. It had come not from party offices, but from the streets, the fields, the hearts of millions. It was no longer just Gandhi's struggle. It was India's. And though the British still ruled, the countdown had begun. At midnight on August 15, 1947, fireworks lit the sky above New Delhi. The Union Jack was lowered. The tricolor of a free India rose for the first time. Cheers erupted in the streets. After nearly 2 centuries of colonial rule, the dream had come true. India was independent, but Gandhi was not there. There were no celebrations for him, no triumph. He spent the night not in parliament, but in a remote village in Bengal, praying, fasting, walking barefoot between Hindu and Muslim communities, pleading for peace. Because as freedom dawned, a nation bled. The price of independence had been partition. British India was split into India and Pakistan along religious lines. What followed was one of the largest and bloodiest migrations in human history. Millions of Hindus and Sikhs fled Pakistan. Millions of Muslims fled India. Trains carried corpses. Rivers ran red. Towns were set ablaze. Brothers became enemies. Neighbors turned on each other. Gandhi had fought his entire life for unity, not just political, but spiritual. He had dreamed of an India where all faiths coexisted, where tolerance was not an idea but a way of life. The partition shattered that dream. And though he had opposed it, his voice, so often a force of history, could not stop the tide. He moved from city to city, trying to calm the fire. In Delhi, he lived among Muslims targeted by angry mobs. In Calcutta, his presence alone halted riots. No speeches, no guards, just his walking stick and his presence. He fasted until attackers laid down their weapons. He made peace not by commanding, but by suffering. His heart broke with each passing day. Some called him a traitor. Extremists accused him of siding with Muslims. They mocked his prayers, his fasts, his pleas for compassion. But Gandhi never sought approval. He sought truth. And truth, he believed, had no religion. As the nation celebrated its rebirth, he mourned its soul. India had become free, but not in the way he had hoped. The British were gone, yes, but hatred had remained. Violence had taken root. Gandhi had once said, "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." In these final months, he poured every breath into service, trying to heal wounds no law could mend. He had given his life to a country that was now both victorious and broken. And in that contradiction, he stood alone, not in bitterness, but in prayer. Not in defeat, but in sorrowful wisdom. Independence had come, but peace had not. In the months following partition, India was a land on fire. The streets of Delhi were filled with refugees, tired, angry, grieving. Mosques were burned, temples defaced, trains arrived packed with corpses, camps overflowed with families torn from their homes. It was not war, it was rage. It was vengeance, unleashed between neighbors who had once shared meals and memories. In this darkness, Gandhi returned to the role he had always played best. Not the politician, not the protester, but the healer. He moved to Delhi, not to rest in the capital of a newborn nation, but to live among the victim. He stayed in a modest home in the heart of the city, surrounded by cries of the displaced. He listened, he prayed, he spoke not to crowds but to wounded hearts. His message was simple: stop the killing. Let love, not faith, define who we are. But few wanted to hear it. Many Hindus, still seething from the bloodshed, saw Gandhi's compassion for Muslims as betrayal. Why should we forgive? They asked. Why should we protect those who turned against us? Gandhi answered not with politics, but with pain. An eye for an eye, he said, will make the whole world blind. When riots exploded in Delhi, Gandhi took the only weapon he had left this body. He declared a fast to the death. He would not eat, not until the violence ceased. His frail frame, already weakened by age, grew thinner each day. The nation watched in silence. Newspapers feared for his life. Leaders pleaded with the mobs, lay down your arms, or you will lose the man who gave you freedom. And then it happened. Leaders from all communities, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs came together and signed a pledge of peace. They promised to protect each other's homes, to stop the bloodshed, to return to the ideals Gandhi had lived for. The violence, at least in Delhi, subsided. Gandhi broke his fast, but the calm was fragile. Hatred still lingered in whispers and glances. Gandhi, now 78, carried not just the weight of his age, but the burden of a nation still searching for its soul. He walked each morning through Birla House gardens, greeting those who came to see him. Some came to thank him, others to question him. He met them all with folded hands and a soft voice. He believed that India's freedom meant nothing if it lost its humanity. He knew the danger. He had been warned, but he refused guards. If I am to die, he said, I will die with a smile, doing my duty. Gandhi was not naive. He was resolute. He knew that healing a nation meant risking everything, even life itself. And so, with every step, every word, every prayer, he became the bridge between rage and reconciliation. He was no longer fighting the British. He was fighting the hatred they had left behind. January 30, 1948. The sun was low in the sky when Gandhi walked into the garden for evening prayer. He was frail, leaning on two young women for support, his steps slow but steady. A man stepped from the crowd, bowed respectfully, then raised a pistol. 3 shots rang out. As Gandhi collapsed, he murmured his final words. Hey Ram, a prayer, a whisper of peace. The man who had freed a nation without ever firing a bullet had been killed by one. India wept. Across the subcontinent, millions poured into the streets. The flames of his funeral pyre rose above the banks of the Yamuna River, and with it rose the soul of a man who had become more than just a leader. He had become a symbol. But Gandhi's death did not end his journey. In many ways, it was only the beginning. His life had been lived in humble homes and crowded jails, on dusty roads and bloodied battlefields not of war, but of conscience. He had challenged empires not with armies, but with truth. He had stood against hatred not with fists, but with silence. He had spoken to power not with anger, but with unwavering resolve. And the world listened. Martin Luther King Jr. read Gandhi's writings and found in them a blueprint for justice. Nelson Mandela, imprisoned for decades, drew strength from Gandhi's refusal to bow. Leaders in Latin America, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia saw in him a path forward that didn't require vengeance. Gandhi had turned suffering into strength. He had shown that one man, armed with nothing but faith and integrity, could awaken the conscience of millions. His message was simple: be the change you wish to see in the world. But behind that simplicity lay a philosophy that reshaped global thought. Nonviolence was no longer weakness, it was power. Truth was no longer abstracted, it was action. Freedom was no longer just a political goal, it was a moral obligation. India today is one of the largest democracies on earth. Its freedom is Gandhi's greatest monument. But his real legacy lies not in flags or speeches, but in the quiet choices of people everywhere who choose compassion over cruelty, courage over fear. His statue stands in front of the British Parliament. His teachings are studied in classrooms across continents. His name is etched into the hearts of those who still believe that peace is possible even in a world at war. And yet, Gandhi himself never sought fame. He once said, "My life is my message." That message lives on, not in history books alone, but in every act of kindness, every protest for justice, every prayer for peace. He is not gone, not truly. So long as there are those who believe in truth without hatred, who resist without violence, who love without condition, Gandhi walks among us still. You've just listened to the remarkable life of Mahatma Gandhi, a man who led with love, who fought with faith, and who left behind a path of peace for generations to follow. Subscribe to Legends of Humanity to discover more timeless stories from across the globe. Leaders, scientists, philosophers, artists, and unsung heroes who shaped the destiny of our world. Legends of Humanity, where history becomes eternal inspiration.